34 years ago today, October 1st, the racing world woke up to the tragic and shocking news of the passing of Rob Moroso and another innocent victim. Today we're going to take a look at his final night, some conflicting stories that lingers around it, and also some future tragic and eerie coincidences that happened to people who were with him on that final night.
3, 2, 1.
NASCAR and alcohol are two things that have seemed to go together hand in hand since the beginning. From the early days of moonshine runners forming the NASCAR series to beer and liquor sponsors to victory lane celebrations, something that's been part of the sport since its beginning. But not all these stories end in celebration. Now, Rob Moroso, he was kind of an enigma at the time in the sport. At a time when the sport was being dominated by drivers in their mid to late 30s and 40s and up. Here comes this young, bright, rising star with a big smile, a big personality, and a big future. Now, Rob was the son of Dick Moroso, a legend in his own right. Rob got his start racing go-karts at the age of 12, quickly moved up to the ranks, becoming the youngest NASCAR National Touring champion in history at the time. He quickly followed that up as he moved to the NASCAR Busch Series, where he became the 1989 NASCAR Busch Series champion at the age of 19. Now, with all this hype and success around him, it was inevitable that he was going to the Cup Series. And in 1990, that's exactly what they did. But along with this, the wins didn't come. The limelight didn't come. The highlights didn't come. And many around Rob said it was starting to wear heavily on him.
We have a car smoking badly in the second corner. That would be Rob Moroso.
For all of his maturity, on the racetrack, he struggled to try to figure it all out off the racetrack, trying to understand how come it was so easy to race in Nationwide and why was it so hard to race in Cup.
Because he wasn't finding the success that he normally had. Now, on September 30th of 1990, Rob just finished 21st in North Wilkesboro at the Holly Farms 400. And as he left the speedway, he went to a local watering hole up on Lake Norman called Woody's, a place where many other NASCAR notable names would go, from drivers to crew chiefs to crew members. And this night was no different. Now, this is where the story gets conflicting, because different people said that Rob was in good spirits that night, even though he was having the luck that he was having. But others said that he wasn't having the best of luck, including Barry Dodson.
He called me later that night. He said, Barry, man, I'm sitting here crying in my beer. He said, come down and talk to me. I was at home, and they were down at a local restaurant. I went down there. It's about the only time I ever saw Rob down and out, and I was a little worried about him.
Now, as noted in that one little article, Todd Parrott was there. It was reported Michael Waltrip was there. And a lot of other people joined in on the conversations that night. But this is where things get crazy, because different people say different conflicting stories about this. The waitress that night said he only had a $35 tab, that he ate, that he had a meal there, and he had 4 beers, 4 Coors Lights. Others have went on record to say that they witnessed him drink several beers before he left there. And it gets even more conflicting as it goes on, because they were leaving there, Rob and his girlfriend, to go to Pier Lounge just a little ways up the road, something they typically did after races. And people have said that his girlfriend was driving the vehicle, his 1990 Olds Cutlass, as they left the restaurant. Just a little while later, rounding a curve on Highway 150, on a 55-mile-per-hour zone that was suggested on a sign to take this curve at 35 miles per hour, Rob took it at 75 miles per hour. The car skidded sideways for over 200 feet and was impacted in the driver's side door by Tammy Williams of China Grove, North Carolina. And in an instant, that rising star was out, along with another young life. Now, what's ironic about this was Trooper Roger Smith was one of the first ones on scene. And there's a very ironic story to this, because just prior to that, Trooper Smith was at North Wilkesboro Speedway, face-to-face with Rob Moroso. So I can only imagine the feeling of going from witnessing him in life to now seeing him in death. Now, after this brought up a lot of conversation about Rob's previous driving history, why he even had a license at this point. And a lot of different people come out started digging into things. Now, on record, on November 21st of 1987, Rob was charged with 64 and a 55. April 23rd of 1988, he was charged with 50 and a 35. On July 17th of 1988, he was charged with 75 and a 55, also driving on the wrong side of the road. Now, not quite sure how that one ended up because there's conflicting stories about what charge actually applied to him at the end. I think the wrong side of the road is what was the conviction, but it's got a relevance in this. On March 30th, 1989, he was charged with 64 and a 55. On August 7th, 1989, he was charged with 64 and a 55. Now, also involved with this was 2 accidents during this time period, one that involved a rollover with Rob. Now, the interesting thing is that in North Carolina, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit changes things for you. So it's very interesting to see all of these 64 and a 55, which tells me it's probably going a lot over the speed limit. There is a very interesting article about a lawyer, which I'm not going to post it here. You can check it out, who represented a lot of these people in these times and said that a lot of these guys were doing really crazy things, but you could get them off on simple charges like this. So there was a lot of questions to this. But with this, it also brought up a lot of questions about a lot of other drivers out there. And a lot of different people started diving into drivers' vehicle records, motor vehicle records. And the Greensboro News and Record was one of the first ones to come out because they jumped on a story that said Kyle Petty, Mark Martin, Morgan Shepherd had several moving violations in recent times. They noted that Morgan Shepherd had 32 tickets since 1959. I'm not laughing about that because it's funny. It's just crazy they went back to 1959 to dig into this, but apparently Morgan had a lead foot for a good period of time. But then there was Richard Petty. Richard Petty went on record to say, you know, if they had his record, they would still be reading it. Now, of course, these were different times throughout these years, apparently back to 1959, obviously. Very different times. But then there was an article by the Charlotte Observer about Ricky Rudd, where they went on record to say that Ricky Rudd had a DWI. And that was, in fact, wrong. And Ricky had to go through different avenues to go after this. And then the Charlotte Observer had to run a front page ad retracting this and apologizing to Ricky Rudd for what they had said about him. Now, there was one driver during this period of time when Rob Moroso's death happened that had a DWI, and that was Greg Sachs. He got one in January of that year. And the interesting thing about this is Greg's appealing this. Apparently, he blew a .011, which at the time, .010 was the North Carolina state limit, which I should add into that Rob Moroso's was .22. He was over twice the limit when his wreck happened. But the interesting thing about Greg Sachs is that he was just signed a 3-year deal with Hendrick Motorsports to drive for them in a number 18 Slim Fast car with some association with Paul Newman at the time, actually. But throughout this situation right here, Hendrick dropped the deal. It was reported that it was because Slim Fast pulled out. Regardless, I think all this had to do with the DWI situation, whether it was Slim Fast did pull out or they just didn't want to be part of this, because the thing is, unless you have a driver's license, you could not obtain a NASCAR license at this time, which I think is what's happened in a lot of these cases, especially with Rob, because points alone at that point would have took his license. And so they did things to make sure these guys could stay behind the wheel of the race car. So, man, just interesting things with this. Now, I want to get to a very eerie, ironic coincidence to these things. And I mentioned Todd Parrott, Barry Dodson, and Michael Waltrip earlier. And these are things that just happened following throughout the years with this. They were all with Rob that night. And Michael Waltrip in 2007, at 2 a.m., going home, had the same situation. Car ran off the side of the road, went across the road, crossed the lane, flipped over into a telephone pole. And Michael got out of the vehicle and walked home in sock feet. There was a witness there. Said she talked to him for a brief moment and told him she called 911, and he took off walking home. Police showed up at his door. 40 minutes later, nobody came to the door. They just took it as nobody was home and come back at 8 o'clock in the morning. He told them what had happened. He was charged with reckless driving and failure to report. but it was later dismissed. And then in October of 2009, Michael was leaving a restaurant and made a U-turn, unfortunately, into the path of a Harley-Davidson who collided with him. And at that point, they gave Michael a field sobriety test on the side of the road, which he passed. And he blew a .06 on a breathalyzer, which was below the limit of .08 in North Carolina at the time. So he was charged with failure to yield. But interesting things that just, Michael, that first wreck, it could have ended up the same way. It's a very questionable situation. But then Barry Dotson. This man, God, it hurts me to even tell this, but Barry Dotson's son, Trey, and his daughter, Tia. Trey was 17. Tia was, was 16. Years after this, they were involved in a wreck at high speed going around a curve where the car lost control, went across the other lane and hit a tree and then impacted another tree. And both of them lost their life at the time. And unfortunately, it was found out later that both of them, basically, there was 5 people in the car and all of them had consumed alcohol that night. So just a scary situation. And again, very ironic with these coincidences. And then Todd Parrott. Todd Parrott went through an unfortunate situation. 2013 was suspended by NASCAR for substance abuse policy. And went down the road to recovery. Well documented on Dale Jr. Download. If you've never seen it, go check it out because it just shows you that people, even in the highest elite forms of life, still go through things and things happen. And everybody makes mistakes. I made mine myself. And, if you got a clean driving record out there, keep it. That's something to be proud of. But man, Rob Moroso, it's just wild to think of what he could have been. I remember the morning, October 1st, when I heard his passing. It was about 5:30 in the morning, and just my heart sinking. And then to find out somebody else died in the incident as well, just tragic. But anyways, I hope everybody out there is off to a great week right now. Happy October, and hopefully we have a lot of good news to come out in the future. Like I said. Man, if you didn't check out my thing on Greg Biffle would go into the mountains to rescue people, you got to go take a look at it. Follow Greg's stuff. Cletus McFarland showed up in his helicopter. So many other people. They've done so many great things out here. Man, it's amazing to see the community. Even where I'm at, down here by Charlotte Motor Speedway, the community's coming together so much to help people. And it's so good to see some goodness. But anyways, once again, hope you're off to a great week. And man, as always, we'll see you at the checkered flag.